Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar, the third in our series for the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition. I am Dave Buchanan. And if we can move to the next slide here, Kelly. I'm the Director of Massachusetts Programs at iCivics. And as you know, iCivics is a major provider of civics curriculum across the country. And we're really pleased to be part of the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition that is hosting this session today. So I'm here representing the coalition as the moderator. And again, appreciate everybody joining us this afternoon for this third in our series. So just as we get started here, I will mention that we are recording this session and we will ask you to stay on mute for the moment. There'll be some moments during the session where you can feel free to unmute and participate that way. I think most of our participation this afternoon will be via the chat, so feel free to add questions and comments there as you see fit. And of course, as we all know, if you have some tech issues, if you're losing audio or whatnot, it might be a good idea to shut down your camera. You can always try that. So as I said, this session is hosted by the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition. Coalition is a group of organizations that came together almost 4 years ago now to particularly advocate for improved civic education here in Massachusetts. We're really comprised of a group of civics education nonprofits, some school districts, youth engagement groups, and research institutions across the state. And no one organization can take credit for all the things we've seen happen here in Massachusetts, but certainly the coalition has played a major role in being a champion for improved civic education here, most particularly for supporting the 2018 civics law that you're all familiar with, I assume, and that has brought some additional funding to Massachusetts as well for civic education. We continue to advocate for that funding and also work very closely with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, again, to advocate for improved civic education across the state. We do have a website which includes access to a set of resources, particularly that we had designed particularly to address the challenges of the COVID-19 outbreak. Those resources are certainly adaptable and usable for in the classroom as well as remote use. And we particularly made a point of creating a set of materials for students and families to use as well. So it's a useful reference point for you if you're looking for some material, particularly on particular topics. We have it broken out by grade level and by some of the main topics in civic education. So we hope you get access to that. I just included links to some of what I'm talking about here in the chat. So hopefully you'll have access to those even after we conclude this session here. So I do want to mention that there is a contest happening here. All of you have probably heard about Educating for American Democracy, the roadmap that came out some months ago. iCivics and Democratic Knowledge Project and Circle and many other hosting organizations from the coalition here were leading organizations in creating that EAD, as we refer to it, the EAD roadmap. And that is really a guide for both policymakers and educators about how to integrate history and civic education together. So we're teaching those more effectively together. There's a lot more to that, and I would encourage you to check out the website that I did include in the chat just now that gives you more information about EAD. But I will just mention, since we're a group of elementary educators, particularly here today, that the EAD is hosting a competition for students to get involved in EAD and thinking about some of the major concepts in EAD. And we're particularly looking for elementary school students to participate in this challenge. This is really, the point of this is really to have students create some original artwork that reflects their interpretation of the EAD roadmap design challenges. So you can get more information about that on the EAD site. And there is a cash prize for the first place winner on that. And it does wrap up at the end of this month. So hopefully some of your students can participate in that. So we have designed these webinar sessions, particularly with an eye to some of the current research about where we stand with civic education in Massachusetts. Previous webinars have focused on issues related particularly to administrators and better supporting administrators in making sure that civic education is happening K-12. We had a session last month around student voice and inclusion. And then of course, this one around civics in the elementary grades. And we've chosen those topics particularly because of the research that's come out through Circle. Again, one of the many partners in the coalition. And if you're not familiar with Circle, they're based at Tufts and are nationally well known and respected for their research work across the country in civic education. Very useful site, but they most particularly, they did an evaluation of the state of civic education in Massachusetts and came up with some key recommendations, focusing particularly on the need to continue to make sure that we're making implementation of the civic education equitable across districts in Massachusetts. We're doing fairly well on that, but remain vigilant on that point as well. To make sure that there's ongoing professional development, both for the elementary grades in particular, but also to fill many of the gaps that middle school and high school teachers feel they need further assistance with. More support for administrators, a big need. And then of course, this focus that we have today in this session around the supporting elementary educators, particularly in providing more time for civic education. And I would say social studies in general in the elementary grades, as well as more quality resources and more PD targeted to these grades particularly. So hopefully we'll get some, we will certainly get some ideas about how to address that in Kelly and Laurie's presentation this afternoon. So our agenda is fairly simple here. I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and Laurie in just a moment to present about History's Mysteries. We will encourage you at certain points to participate. Again, feel free to add your questions in the chat and there'll be opportunity to respond to those. And we will have a Q&A at the very end. So we've planned to have a little bit extra time to make sure that happens. So do feel free to participate during that as well.
Okay, we ready to go?
So Laurie and Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you. I just want to say I really appreciate all the time you've put into preparing this session and all the time you've really put toward creating the History's Mysteries curriculum that we're going to hear about today as a real response to a very clear need in the field right now. So I'm going to turn it over to you if you would introduce yourselves and talk about your backgrounds a little bit before you jump into the presentation. Thanks again.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Brown, and I am actually a history and government teacher at East Hampton High School. But I have been there for 20 years, and I am a K-12 professional development facilitator. I've been working with teachers across Massachusetts and really across New England, and then with History's Mysteries across the country to provide professional development around civics and history and inquiry, and really to help social studies teachers bring the use of primary sources to the classroom in question-based, inquiry-based learning. And so I'm really very, very excited to be with you all today. And Laurie and I are very excited to share our program and our curriculum with you and with your teachers if you are here as an administrator.
I'm Laurie Risler. I'm teacher in residence at Westfield State University, where I train pre-service teachers. But my background is as an elementary school teacher, and I worked in a fully inclusive 4th and 5th grade classroom for the majority of my time in the classroom. And my love of primary sources and working with students in history developed there. Kelly and I have been leading professional development together for more than 10 years all over, and Histories, Mysteries is really our answer to what we were looking for when we were working with teachers. And so it is by teachers and for teachers, and we're excited today to share it with you. So here's Histories, Mysteries. We are grateful for some support from the Library of Congress, Teaching with Primary Sources, and many others, Merging America at the Collaborative for Educational Resources, who have helped us bring this to life so that we can offer it to teachers.
And we don't need to introduce ourselves again, but again, we're just really happy to be here with you. We also wanted to introduce our Histories, Mysteries detectives team. So we have 4 Histories, Mysteries detectives that are young folks that help us with our mysteries in our program. So from left to right, this is Jordan, Ale, Aiden, and Sophia, and they, make our Histories, Mysteries more fun and exciting and help students solve the mysteries that we create in this inquiry-based curriculum.
So our goal for our short time together today is to jump right in with inquiry, and we hope you will play along with us. We're going to talk about what is a history mystery, as well as what is Histories, Mysteries. We're going to talk about where to start, the sort of features for teachers and features for students, as well as a glimpse into the content specifically around the areas of civics. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end.
So we wanted to just start today with talking a little bit about what historical inquiry is. It really is the center of what Histories, Mysteries is. And the way that our curriculum works is we have a 4-step inquiry process that we use with students, which I think will look relatively familiar. And it's something that we think is incredibly important, and the research says it's incredibly important in social studies, but isn't necessarily being done often in the social studies. And it was something that educators were really asking for. And so you'll see in our process that the process starts with initiating inquiry. So students have the opportunity to connect and wonder and connect to the inquiry that's actually happening, and students get a chance to explore a question and get started. In the second step of inquiry, students explore primary and secondary sources to look for relevant evidence to help them answer a question. So each one of our mysteries is designed around a question, and students are able to ask questions about the sources. They can work collaboratively to observe, to think, and to wonder. And then we move on to the third step, where students are actually connecting an answer to the inquiry question that they've been exploring. So they're connecting the evidence and the question together, and they're drawing conclusions. They're coming up with possible answers to the questions and kind of constructing a claim. And you'll notice, and we'll talk about it later, that this really aligns with the practice standards for the 2018 social studies standards that were released. And the final step is having students figure out a way to communicate their answer. So students have the opportunity to write or talk or show or draw or even act out their claims. And of course, because inquiry is an iterative process, the process could actually start all over again if teachers want to dig deeper. So one thing that we always try to stress when we introduce inquiry to teachers is that it's important to remember that the understanding actually expands as students learn more, and it's okay to not answer every question. So part of inquiry is encouraging students to ask questions. And so sometimes as a class, we don't even solve all of those mysteries, but it gets students thinking about asking and coming up with claims that they can defend with evidence. The other thing is that the skills practiced in inquiry are as important as any conclusions that students draw. And we know that they're incredibly transferable. And also it helps to create a more inclusive classroom because there are multiple entry points and multiple exit points for students.
So let's jump in with inquiry. We're going to just jump into our first inquiry, which is around the next photo on the next slide. And our question is, what are these children doing? And we're going to conduct this inquiry in a way that is engaging for students, but also helps train those observational skills that lead to good inferencing skills. So what I'm going to ask you to do is find yourself a piece of paper. Because before we get started, we're going to need to create an organizer for your notes. So you'll need a blank piece of paper. Next slide, Kelly. And what you're going to do is you're going to fold it in half, and you're going to fold it in half again. And I know you can do that because you either are or were a teacher, and we know how to do those things. And you're going to open it up. And moving forward from here, you are going to go ahead and open it up. It should look like this. And then you're going to look closely at this picture, and you're going to write down everything you see in the part of the image that's shown on your page. So if we go to the first part, you're going to write or draw in that upper left-hand corner. And you're going to write down everything you see. So look closely. What do you notice? What do you notice about the setting? What do you notice about the weather, the light, time of year maybe? What are people holding? What do you notice in the foreground, the background, along the edges? What do you notice about the people, their clothing, their facial expressions, personality, jobs, importance? What seems to be happening in this portion of the picture? Want to notice those that are active versus those who are inactive. And then most importantly, any questions you have. So I'm going to encourage you, can people maybe either put in the chat or unmute? What's something you noticed as you look at this portion of the image?
So feel free to drop it in the chat. I'll keep an eye on that as you go through, and I can read stuff aloud if people, but what do you see?
What do you see? It's an outdoor scene. Thanks, Donna. Any questions you have, anyone, as you look at this portion of the image? Oh, late fall. Siobhan, I'd ask you what makes you say that if you're in my classroom, because we always want to point our students right back to the source. It looks like there aren't any leaves on the tree or shrub. Excellent, right? Because we want to remind students that it's not magic. We're looking at the source. Might be an old picture. It's black and white. Wondering what he has in his hand. Looks like a neighborhood. You see houses. I want to ask what the kid is holding. We could do this for a long time, but Kelly, I'm going to force us to move to the next one because we have a lot to cover. As you look at the next portion, I want you to do the same thing. What do you notice? What do you notice about the setting? What do you notice about the people? What do you notice about the objects? Action, inaction? I see formal dress. What else do you notice as you look at this part of the image? Wooden barrel. What questions do you have as you look at this part of the image? Oh, he's outside of a building, maybe a schoolhouse given his age. I love it. So not only the observation, but the inference. Woman sitting on stairs, long dress, someone sitting on stairs, brick foundations with clapboards. Excellent. And again, it shows that, you know, one of the great things about inquiry is you find out what your students know. Best looks hand knitted. What's the relationship between the woman on the stairs and the two boys? Excellent questions. Kelly, one more section. Let's keep going. Bottom right. Look closely at this part of the picture and write down everything you see. What do you notice? What do you notice about the setting, the people, the objects? What questions do you have? Patched pants. Thanks, Sue. Wooden ambulance toy, looks like he's painting it. Cross on vehicle. I like that. Looks like an ambulance, Sandy. Thank you. And why? Because she sees the cross on the vehicle. You notice anything else in this portion of the image? Obviously, this is a little harder too when we're all on small screens and not either a large screen or an image right in front of you. They're wearing shoes, not sneakers. Great observation. This answered my question about what was likely in the first boy's hand, a paintbrush. It looks like something is in pieces next to him, hard to tell. Some kind of shin guards. Maybe those are for football. Didn't even notice. Shadow, sitting on grass. Excellent. All right, let's go to that last portion of the image. Look closely, write down everything you see. Think about the setting, the people, the objects, action, inaction, what you think might be happening, questions you might have, cork top bottles. Absolutely. Looks like a toy gun. Is that a battleship? Great observation. So we see a ship. We wonder if it's a battleship. We see a gun. We hope it's a toy gun. Anything else? Any other questions? So now look closely at the whole picture and add any details in any section that now become apparent as you're looking at the image as a whole. Add any additional questions you might have, any additional observations you make while looking at the whole image. Anyone notice something they didn't before? Are they recreating a scene? Sandy, I wonder what made you say that. Any other questions? We still can't be sure where they are, even with the whole image. Exactly. Getting students to be comfortable with the leftover questions is important. Ooh, black tripod looks like maybe a stand for the gun. They look like they're enjoying it. Different objects related to war. So lots of great observations in this first activity. If we can move on, Kelly. So I wanted folks to talk. Some of you are welcome to unmute if you want, or you can just put it in. Did someone point something out that you just didn't see at all, or you wouldn't have noticed if they hadn't said anything? Oh. Allison, what did you, what? I'm interested. The toy gun. I actually did not notice the toy gun the first time I saw this image. And then when I did it in quarters, it just leapt out to me. And so you want to have students share with partners, talk about what they noticed, listen to what others noticed, great exchange of language, especially for our ELs. And any other questions? I saw, when did this scene occur? What year? That's a great question. Hopefully your students are going to learn that this goes really well when we end with more questions than we started with. I was naming objects, but Sandy grouped them as related to war, which, yeah, that's sorting and analysis. You get to see all sorts of different levels of work as students begin to engage. And so after they do this, you might then want to go to this next section where you ask students to say, what do you think's happening in the picture? And that's what I say to you. What do you think's happening and why? Go ahead if you're willing and put it in the chat. What do you think's happening in this picture and what makes you say that?
And Laurie, I really love this question at the end that you ask too, when you say, like, if you were going to give this a title.
I know.
That's just a fun question sometimes to practice as well. So share with us, what do you think? What do you think this image is?
And I love the title one because it's also kind of a synthesizing question. It really gets students to synthesize all their thinking. So Sandy thinks they're working on a history project. Anyone else have any other guesses? Oh, modeling after family dinner. Wondering if it's supposed to be the Titanic. Fun. Maybe a scouting project. And just like in your class, you'll get this sense of different things that people know. Like, I like the scouting idea. Scouting something, some of your students may know about, others may not. So I think we would need more context. And I think with a little more context, you might begin to think about it a little differently. Kelly, can we go to the next slide for a sec? Let's give them one piece of context. This photo was taken May 24th, 1919 in Colorado. Anybody have any connection to, dates around that time, things that might've been going on? It's a little different than we'd do it in the classroom. Post-World War I. Anybody else? Anything that might've been going on? You can give another context clue, Kelly. This particular photo is part of the American National Red Cross photograph collection. That get anything going for anyone?
And I think what's fun, so this is an example of
Memorial Day.
Yep, one of our introduction to inquiry kind of things where we could say to students, like, what does the Red Cross do? What might they be associated with? Is there any reason why kids might be thinking about the Red Cross, or the Red Cross might be taking pictures? So things that you give this opportunity to sort of brainstorm ideas if students don't necessarily know the context, and you can give these little clues. You want me to give the next one, Laurie?
Sure, keep going. It's titled The Backyard Workshop While School Was Closed for Influenza. The pandemic, absolutely, Sandy. Another time the schools were closed. And I think I have one more bullet and I can't even remember what it is, Kelly. Oh, so if you were to use these with students, what other additional context would you need to provide? Can you think of other sources you might use with students? Spanish flu, which, right, Christy, great conversation piece. Why was it called the Spanish flu? Anybody else have anything they think they might use or add to provide context for students? I had a couple, Kelly, if you pop to the next page. I thought, what would I maybe pair this with? And this is actually a picture I used to pair with modern ones. Both of these I pair with modern ones for a having kids talk about their pandemic experiences. But do you think this one might help if they were paired together? What do you notice? What about this brief read from the Treasury Department? Masks, right. Students are going to connect to masks. I think they'll also connect to covering coughs and sneezes, maybe not with a handkerchief, avoid crowds. What's great about inquiry and what's great about primary sources is we can use them to connect to kids, but they can also connect in ways that are personal and meaningful to them. Obviously, in a more urban area, students will recognize public transportation. I might choose a different image for a more rural area, but helping kids start to make those connections and those questions, and knowing that they can move from observation to inference to coming up with questions that can help answer the initial inquiry. Kelly.
So just to quickly kind of sum up and transfer into now telling you about what History's Mysteries is as a curriculum, because I know that's why you came today. I want to come back to this graphic to just make a quick point, which is as part of our curriculum, which you'll learn about in a second, in our program, we encourage teachers to just introduce students to the cycle of inquiry to start. So what you just experienced is like a mini example of how we introduce students to the process of inquiry. And so they're looking at an image that they can connect to. Right? So it's young people, they're making something, they're going through a pandemic. There are all these connections that potentially could happen that students might have questions about and wonder about. And students can look closely. We asked you to zoom in on those images and really look at those parts and get students practicing close reading and careful, detection of evidence. Then they have to decide, what are they going to do with that evidence? And so we have maybe an ambulance, and we have men on a trolley with a mask, and we have a warning, and we have kids who aren't in school, who it seems like a week, it could be a weekend, I suppose, but it's daylight and they're not in school and they're being supervised. And can we work to collect that evidence so students can draw conclusions and then present that conclusion in some way, shape, or form? And so obviously our introductions have many more steps to get elementary students to that. But we'd like to just kind of start with showing you, elementary students can and should be doing inquiry, and they're doing it in many, many places, but it hasn't been as prominent in the curriculum that has been materials that have been given at the elementary level for social studies and civics. And so that's why we're so excited to offer this as a way for students to engage in that. So the question is now, like, what is a history mystery? So a history mystery is kind of what you just did. Students answer historical questions by looking at a primary source or primary source evidence. And then after collecting the evidence, they develop claims and they express them in creative ways. And it's like solving a mystery. And so in our curriculum, we invite students to become detectives, and we ask them to help us solve a mystery that needs to be solved. And they have to put together all of their evidence and draw conclusions and go through the inquiry process as they go. And as we mentioned, we start with these introductory pieces, and then they really dig into content and follow the same process as they go. So like every other kind of lesson, mysteries have kind of ingredients. And just so you know, all the histories, mysteries, origins really comes from the Massachusetts frameworks. When Laurie and I were doing professional development across the state, we really saw that people needed and wanted and were asking for more. And so for all of our mysteries, we start from the standards. We work very heavily with the Library of Congress to identify primary sources, and then we come up with a good historical question, and that is how our curriculum is sort of pieced together. And while we have focused on the Massachusetts 2018 framework, we also know and make the point that our curriculum aligns with the C3 framework. And also, we always encourage people, and we've been working with districts to align them with their own curriculum guides and the work that they're doing, and also interdisciplinary work. So as you all know, the literacy standards at the elementary level are really the same in ELA and history. And so really looking at interdisciplinary ways that educators can mix their local initiatives with history and what the state is asking, and also the C3 initiative. Just to make very short reference here to the frameworks, I think this is really important. And I think many of you probably know this, but maybe some of you aren't as familiar with the history and social science framework that came out in 2018. There are 3 sets of standards that are in the framework. And so I was actually part of this committee, and Dave obviously was part of this committee as well. And probably some of you were also part of this committee. And the bottom left, the content standards, are generally what a lot of people are used to thinking about for teaching history and social studies. It's the list of topics and questions and things that teachers are going to address at that grade level. On the other side, the literacy standards, our elementary teachers are familiar with those through ELA, and those literacy standards are the same. But the newest piece of the Massachusetts 2018 framework were the practice standards. And so this to me was incredibly exciting. This is really sort of my wheelhouse and joy, is the idea of having a K-12 set of disciplinary skills that students are working on at every grade level that include both civic knowledge and civic action, but also the inquiry process. And if you've spent any time with this, you know that really steps 2 through 6 are inquiry. That's what it is. It's asking students to engage in answering questions, asking questions, looking at evidence, and developing claims. And so our work is embedded in those content standards, overlaps with the literacy, but really focuses on a K-5 model for helping students develop their skills in inquiry and civics application. And that is really exciting, and I think a really important tie, because you can go in so many directions. So helping teachers focus on that framework is really important. And just a reminder, inquiry is not about finding the right answer. And so really encouraging students to continue to ask and to leave some questions unanswered. So we have a couple of suggestions about finding sources, and we'd love to help your teachers with this if they want to do it on their own. Laurie, did you want to mention these?
Well, we love using resources at the Library of Congress because we know they're free, and that's important. We also know we have legal access. You can find out that they're copyright free and use them. So if you click again, Kelly, I'm going to shortcut this for them. Here's my favorite pro tip. Instead of necessarily struggling to figure out right away how to search the library, which can be challenging at times, and it's worth getting there. If you go into your Google search engine and you put whatever keyword you're looking for, like my Margate City elephant on the top left picture there, and then you put site:/loc.gov, all the power of Google will find matches within the Library of Congress collection for you. And I will just tell you, as a teacher, it's a huge time saver to find high quality resources that you could freely use with your students. And quite frankly, if you look, political cartoons, maps, music, photographs, can I put that in the chat? I will, as soon as Kelly's talking. And just all sorts of collections, of Chronicling America, newspaper collections from the past. They're just wonderful ways to get students writing, and I'll be honest, I used them in science too, in every area when I was in the classroom. Especially for social studies, immense resources. So I'll put that in a minute. So we want to find great sources. After we find great sources, the next thing we really need to think about doing is developing a good historical inquiry question. And not only should it be good, it should also be a little exciting for the students. It has to be authentic, something that we really want to know, a real question that a real historian might take on. They're complex and they have multi-levels of analysis. And my favorite is our kindergarten inquiry. We use with kindergartners, you'll see some work later. Kelly uses it with our high school students. I use it with my college pre-service students and my graduate students. And they all produce great responses, but at different levels. A really good question actually requires the students to use the source and closely. It's not something they're just answering from their head. And they're paired with sources that have adequate evidence. And this is really tricky. Sometimes you'll find a source and you'll say it's great. But when you look at it in conjunction with a question you've designed, you find out that it really doesn't provide enough for students to answer the question. A good historical question stimulates ongoing thinking and inquiry. It's going to raise more questions. And that was one of my favorite things, myths. We have more questions than when we started. And I always like to say, shall we celebrate? It takes a while for kids to know that that's okay. They should spark discussion and debate. Kids should be able to come up with different answers and still both be able to support that with evidence. They demand justification and support. And as our students' understanding deepens, their answers might change. So that's a good historical inquiry question.
So what we're going to do now is just sort of quickly take you through what you can see if you visit the Histories Mysteries program, what kinds of things you can find on our website, what kind of resources there are, and then you can spend however much time you'd like there because everything is free and it's accessible and you can go ahead and browse all you want. We will share in the chat the link to our website, but this is pretty much what our main level page looks like. This is our home page. And we always have some announcements at the top, but as you scroll down, you'll see that at the top, there is a piece that says introduce your students to the work of historians. This is where we have those introduction to inquiry modules that we always encourage teachers to start with. And then we have grade level pages. So right now we have 2 full units, which include 3 to 4 mysteries for every unit for each grade level. And then each grade level has its own page where you can go ahead and browse through those mysteries and look at all of the resources that we have there. Laurie, I'm going to keep going, and then if we have time to go back to the site, we can at the end.
Absolutely.
It just gives you kind of the visual for what it looks like.
So where and how do I start? As soon as you go to the Histories Mysteries page, you will, this is what it will look like. You are looking right here at grade 4, unit 1, mystery 1, how to map shape how we think about the world. And as you navigate this page, what you will see is here is the click and play narration. You would hear Kelly or I, depending on which unit it is, narrating it. You can play, it tells you when to stop, etc. Right below, right on the main page, you'll see the lesson plan. Look at the lesson plan. We give you a lot of suggestions. Biggest one I'm going to point out right here is lesson does not mean one class. So read it carefully. In addition, on this page, you will find student handouts and teacher resources. So, oh, sorry. We're good, Kelly. It's fine. For students, you want them to start with the slideshow and the handouts. This is not a program where you can just give students the handouts and expect them to be able to navigate. They are deeply embedded in the content and need what is the content that is in the slides to interact with them. So in this case, these are just thumbnails of maps that they're exploring in the slideshow. Features for teachers. What kinds of teacher features are common in our Histories Mysteries? You will find.
So we'll take you through just a few of these tools that we've created. So Laurie mentioned the narrated slideshows, but we also have transcripts in case you want to narrate on your own. And we'll briefly just talk here about our formative assessments, the ability to adapt, some virtual tools, some responsive practice, and some other teacher resources.
Oops, sorry, I was trying to put something in the chat, Kelly. Here are examples of transcripts. You will find them not quite yet on every mystery. In response to teachers early on asking for them, we have been adding them to all new mysteries and are slowly going back and adding them to our earlier mysteries. Formative assessments. Kelly, what you will see is in every one, we have chances where you can ask students to demonstrate understanding with sorts. And so it might be a physical sort where they're cutting them out because you're in the classroom and we're all back in school and they're physically sorting them. We have also made adaptations so that they can sort virtually on sides. There'll be visual check-ins where, you know, students might have cards and we ask them to hold up when they hear something that indicates that. We have students highlighting slides. We're doing lots to make sure there are multiple opportunities within every lesson to have students giving you feedback so you know where their level of understanding is.
So one thing that happened is Histories Mysteries was ready to roll out in late February of 2020. And so you might recognize that date as the date that the world began to close. And so very quickly, teachers were like, can we use this for virtual teaching, right? Like we had rolled this out as a classroom program, we had done our PD, and all of a sudden teachers were teaching online. And so we very quickly made some adaptations that would make it easier to use sort of a one-to-one or a home learning or virtual learning. And so we came up with virtual sorts, and we created handouts with text boxes. And, a year ago, all of the learning curve has been intense. I'm a teacher myself, so I know all the things that we've learned, but we really tried to adapt and make this usable. So now our program is really usable in face-to-face and virtual classrooms. And like, just to give you an example, I'm going to escape out of this for just one moment to show you that we created, these slides where we're looking at push and pull factors, and students can now drag these. So you could assign this as a slide, you could do it as a class, but to having this opportunity to sort of use these virtually was one of the many things that we've added in to make these more virtually responsive and useful in the classroom. The other thing that's been incredibly important to us, and a lot of teachers when we were doing professional development were asking us for help on finding resources to teach challenging content. And so we've worked very hard to teach both the narrative that's expected of teachers and the topics that are expected of teachers, but to also push our curriculum to ask challenging questions and to include multiple perspectives and to really challenge the traditional narrative of American history by asking students to explore more deeply. So just for an example, all of these might be examples, but in first grade, when we look at leadership, we look at what made George Washington an amazing leader, but we also look into the fact that George Washington was a slave owner. And we look at Ona Judge, who is, if you don't know, was enslaved at Mount Vernon and escaped and lived her life as a fugitive, and her form of leadership. And so we really try to think about ways to help teachers to bring in challenging content into their classroom with resources that are quality and based in history and will help them to address these issues. Additionally, we try very hard to create responsive practice, so historically responsive and culturally responsive practice. This is just one example of a grade 3 mystery where we look at what strategies Native nations use to protect their own independence, but we start the unit by talking about Native nations today. Because one of the issues in teaching Native history is that Native people are so often placed solely in the past. And so by starting from the present and allowing us to look at Native nations today and struggles for sovereignty, it helps students to really, again, address some of the content that's so important as we realign and bring in multiple perspectives. And one last piece, we try hard to think about the narratives we include and whose narratives we include. And as we introduce different types of narratives, we try to talk about our process as well. So this is a situation where we're using a narrative that is written in dialect, that we make some shifts in the dialect so it's easier for young people to read and recognize words. But instead of just changing it, we actually have a conversation about it. We talk about why did we change it and what are we changing and why it might be important to try to actually read once you become a stronger reader in a dialect and really understand the various ways that people speak English. And so these are just some examples of the many ways that we've tried to work that in.
In the mysteries, you'll also find teacher resource page, and these grow as we have time and ability, but also grow based on feedback from folks like yourself. There'll be recommended books for kids and websites and content area background for teachers. And so always check them out, but if you find a great resource, please let us know. We'd love to add them and keep it moving and keep it fresh.
Yeah, and so we're just going to share a couple of features for students, and then in a minute, we're going to open up for questions. So each of our mysteries has vocabulary. We have modified sources, interactivities, handouts, literacy connections, and civic action. Oops.
So if you look at the vocabulary, you can see that this is really important. We spend a lot of time on it in terms of introducing it earlier, giving visual connections, practicing in it lots of ways. You can explore this, and this is something we get a lot of positive feedback from teachers on, is the importance of vocabulary. Another feature that we have is, we talked about it briefly, modifying sources, again with full disclosure, but making things like Frederick Douglass's speech accessible to third graders, I think is important, and we do that. Interactivity, so making this live and 100% participation based, we do it lots of ways, whether it's playing geographers hide and seek using cardinal directions when students are learning them, whether it's, you know, highlighting things, circling things, and having students hold up cards to match. Kindergarten students giving 1, 2, or 3, or a whole hand, talking about where work happens. Voting, hide and seek in a mural where kids are answering riddles, drawing. But the idea is very interactive. Even though it can be done virtually, we still expect it to be an interactive program. And you'll see this throughout every mystery.
In terms of handouts, there are handouts for every mystery, and they're multifaceted. So sometimes they're looking at a text, sometimes they're sorting, sometimes they're drawing, sometimes they're preparing a rant. But there are all different ways that students can engage with the handouts, and these can obviously all act as formative or even summative assessments in some ways.
Here you see examples of completed student handouts, and you can see some kids are in person and they're drawing. Other kids are online and they're finding really creative ways to draw lines and to do other things. So worksheets are available in both Google format, so kids can type into them, as well as, you know, PDF printed out, use it in person.
Okay, and then lastly, we have some literacy connections that lead to civic action. So we have connections through picture books that students are going to use, and asking them to look for evidence in those picture books. We have writing connections. This is an example of our 5th grade exit ticket, where students actually are looking at applying the Tinker standard, which many of you may be familiar with, to cases, and asking whether or not there would be the potential for a big disruption in school, and they have to explain their answer. And so you can see the connection to literacy there. Additionally, we have literacy that leads to civic action. So instead of just writing for teacher, students are writing for audience. They're writing a letter. This is part of our Clotilda and Kazula Kudjoe Lewis mystery on the transatlantic slave trade. And we have examples of civic action. This is our 1st grade mystery. Laurie, do you want to just mention this and we'll wrap up?
Oh, yep. So in this one, students are looking at what they can do during a free recess period. They vote. They learn about being informed voting after they vote. They then talk about the common good and start to think about friends who might be in a wheelchair or friends who don't know how to play soccer. They vote again and talk about how thinking about the common good might have changed their choices, among other things. Kelly, I realize I copied the link wrong, so I'll have to get it in. This is another one, a thought experiment. We love them. This is in the kindergarten Juneteenth mystery. And we look at this issue of people who were kept from celebrating Juneteenth. We asked the student to think about, what would you do? Would you celebrate his plan knowing you might get in trouble? Talk to people in the government and try to change the law? Or do you collect money from family and friends to buy a park where you could celebrate as you want? They find out that Emancipation Park in Houston is a park that was bought to celebrate Juneteenth, but they also find out that the diversity of African Americans did all of these things at different points during this attempt to move the holiday forward.
So I think what we're hoping is that you'll take some time when you get a chance. You'll see when you go to our site, and I'll just quickly go through that we have lots of civic content that is worked in. And then what you'll see is each grade level has 2 units right now that you'll be able to browse and look at all you would like. And we're working on doing some more units this summer. So we're just going to keep sort of adding and trying to provide more curriculum for teachers so that they can also recenter civics and social studies in the classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that we can spend the last few minutes answering any questions. Dave, if you want to open that up, or if you have anything you want to say and inviting people to ask questions, but we want to thank you for listening to our presentation and hope that you'll check out our site.
Kelly, can you put the History's Mystery link in?
Yep.
But please do ask any questions. And I guess the one thing that we never said is this is free. That was part of what was really important to us. It's free to access. It's free. It's open source. It's in Google, so you can, adapt it for your classrooms. But we would love to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, so folks should just feel free to unmute if you'd like to, and we'll just have a couple of minutes of discussion here. So I would guess there are some questions about what they just presented. There's a lot of material, pretty engaging curriculum, and a lot of interesting opportunities for all of you as elementary educators.
That's awesome, Donna.
Great. Do explore, and we popped up our emails, and please feel free to reach out. When you go to the page, there's a little link at the bottom that says contact History's Mysteries. That goes to Kelly and I, and we'd be glad to answer your questions and be in touch. Oops, yeah, we'll put our emails in the chat. Good idea.
Yeah. So let's see. So comments include, in case anybody hasn't seen them yet, Donna is an elementary school librarian and looking for this kind of curriculum to complement classroom lessons. So that's very exciting. I actually was just talking to our district librarian today, and she was really excited. She was coming up with all these different connections. Dawn works in a historic house and already see adaptations. We love working with museums and historical sites. One of our fourth grade lessons focuses on the Wisteria Hearst, some of the Wisteria Hearst resources in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and looks at water and industry. So that's really fun.
And some fabulous educators have combined actually that fourth grade unit with science. We've seen really, you're all so creative. It's been fun. Yes, this is being recorded, Carolyn.
Where will that be posted, Dave?
Yep. So Carolyn, we'll have this posted on the Coalition website, and I'll include links to an evaluation for this session, but also a link to that site in a moment in the chat, so you'll have access to that. We should have that posted probably tomorrow.
We also have a really active network community on the Teaching with Primary Sources network through the Library of Congress. So if anybody wants to join that, you can join right from our site. And it's a good, like a lot of teachers post ideas, or here's how I used this, or, ask questions. So it's kind of fun to be part of that History's Mysteries group. It's free. You just make a basic account with the Library of Congress after clicking on our TPS site and join our group, and you get a chance to do that, which is fun, and you get to learn from other teachers who are doing this. And we take feedback very seriously. So if you try something and you have a suggestion, or you hit a bump, or you have questions, you should definitely contact us, because Laurie and I are very attuned to that. Like, our only goal for this, it's like our heart and soul has gone into this, is for it to get to teachers and for teachers to be able to use it. And we just really want that to happen. So anything that we can do to help with that, we're here and we're ready to help.
Even some of the first unit topics came from needs and specific teachers that we were working with. So please do reach out. It makes it all worth it.
So one of the points you've both made in some previous sessions is just how adaptable this is to integrate with the rest of the curriculum. You guys have really been very thoughtful about how to make this as an efficient way of teaching this content, and one that really supports literacy and other content material as well. So you can, I think you can see from the presentation today how you might fit in many of the pieces of the content that Kelly and Laurie have presented today into the rest of what you're trying to teach, and really gain some support for what you're trying to teach elsewhere too.
And we also really encourage educators to shop around in the other grade levels. I'm sure you guys already do this if you're an elementary educator, you know, but for example, we have a lot of grade 3 materials on the Revolution, but grade 5 also teaches the American Revolution. So we always encourage educators and district curriculum coordinators, et cetera, to kind of shop around in the grade levels and think about how you might adapt it slightly, but apply it in other places. And so that's something we're thinking a lot about and providing some recommendations, but everything is Google based. So you can make a copy and edit for your own classroom use. We ask that people not post it anywhere on a public site, but you are able to make a copy and then you can, you know, mix and match. We have recorded slideshows with static slideshows. So you can narrate some of it with your students. You can bring Laurie and my voices in some, and you can edit the handouts.
Or even if it's a question of, you know, you're in one of those schools that you get like a 20-minute social studies block, it allows you to divide those into a bunch of mini lessons and change it for those purposes, as well as to connect into other things. And we encourage people to do that. And we love to hear when people are doing it. So please do reach out. Please do reach out with questions.
The two of you get so excited about describing this. It's really hard to end the session here, but we are going to need to wrap up.
Okay.
So I do really want to thank you both for all the preparation of this session and just for creating this really engaging curriculum that I think has such opportunities for educators across the state and across the country actually too. And I'm just really, struck by the fact that there's one of the big challenges in Massachusetts and elsewhere is really about how to teach elementary school students this material. And you guys have really latched on and created this new material that really demonstrates to everybody that we can have elementary students really doing some very challenging tasks and gaining these new skills. So thanks for that inspiration and for keeping this all moving so quickly and so in such an inspiring way. So thank you for the presentation today.
Sure. And thanks to all the educators and administrators and everybody that's been working in schools. This has been an amazing and stressful year. And I just want to say thanks for all the work you do, because I know how hard.
Thank you for all you do, and you still come to PD. Be well.
Late afternoon PD. So I have included a link to an evaluation for this session, just to give us some feedback for future sessions. So feel free to give us your feedback in that via that link. And we will be wrapping up the webinars for this year, but returning to those in the fall again, I hope. So do join us in the future. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks, folks.